Using very old tools in a different world, a world with globalization, a world with new technologies, and so on. So that doesn't really work. So basically, what we're facing in business today, and it's the same for startups and for large companies, is we're using yesterday's tools, we're using old tools to do today's job. And that is not very good. It's very stressful. So let me get back to this idea of surgeons and the operating theater. So before a surgeon is allowed to operate, he's trained for a very long time. But what's really interesting is that they have a whole tool set, a toolbox that they use to operate. And depending on the situation they face, they will take one tool or another tool. So they're very sophisticated in the use of tools, which we are not today in business and entrepreneurship. We just kind of do it, and we might have some lofty principles. You know, lean startup is also it's very good, but it's pretty vague also. We're not really trained in doing this yet, right? So a surgeon is trained in average, if you take the US, for 13 years. First, you learn a lot about the anatomy of a person. Then, you have a lot of chemistry, biology, and so on. Then maybe one day you start operating on dead bodies or on simulation. And then one day you're allowed to start operating on living bodies and only under supervision. So it takes a very long time, and we're trained to do so. In business, that's not the case. We read an interesting book, right, like Business Model Generation or Lean Startup, and then we go out and do it. So it's very ad hoc. I think that entrepreneurship, strategy, and innovation over the next years will be trained more like we train surgeons. We will become very sophisticated at using tools. And that's what my team and I are really passionate about, building business tools, okay? And that's why we came up with the business model canvas, and now with the value proposition canvas. So I don't know are people in the room familiar with the business model canvas?
Yes, like they are familiar with the business model canvas. So actually before this we are talking, and people are interested on once we fill up the business model canvas, what's next? How do we innovate? How do we, what are the techniques to innovate a business model canvas? So people.
Okay, so I'll get to that, right? But the basic point here is the business model canvas is one tool. We came up with another tool called the value proposition canvas. There's other tools like jobs to be done. We will have this kind of image with several tools. If we really want to be good at entrepreneurship, strategy, and innovation, we need to use many tools. People who tell you there's just one tool and it does everything, they're lying. And that still happens. People write a book and they say it's almost a religion, which it's not, right? You're trained to use a lot of tools, and the tools need to work together. This is the first key insight, and then later on we can get to how you use these tools. Here's the second insight. I'll go back in time. So you might know that the Swiss invented the time machine. Actually, very close from where I live, we invented the time machine. So I'm going to take you back to 1958. In 1958, there was a guy whose name is Chester Carlson. And I learned about Chester Carlson from a friend of mine, Henry Chesbrough. So Henry Chesbrough coined the term open innovation. He told me the story of Chester Carlson. So Chester Carlson was at a company called Haloid. Later, they became Xerox. And he was the head of a research team that invented this, the first modern-day photocopying machine, okay? This machine could make 2,000 copies a day at a time where you could only make about 30 copies with a very chemical and smelly process. This was 1958. This machine could make 2,000 copies a day, so much more than anything else. But the problem was that this machine was very expensive. So Chester Carlson and his team went to the consultants. They went to a company called Arthur D. Little. And they asked them, well, what should we do with this technology? Arthur D. Little went out and talked to customers. Okay, so you could say they applied, the getting out of the building. They talked to customers. But the customers told them, well, we're not interested. We don't want to buy this. So Arthur D. Little came back and told Chester Carlson and his team at Halloween Xerox, you know, nobody's going to buy this. There's no market. There's nothing you can do with this technology. Well, the good news is that Chester Carlson and his team, they didn't listen. They didn't listen to the consultants, and that's not the lesson here. The lesson is that they designed the business model that created an entire industry. They said, well, we're going to lease these machines to you. You can lease it for $95 every month, and you get 2,000 copies for free per month. But you pay a couple of cents per additional copy, and you pay for extra services. This is the business model that still dominates photocopying today, and it was phenomenal for Xerox, and they grew substantially. So what I want you to keep in mind here is that technology and products are not enough. They're just a little component of what you're trying to do in business. And if you look at where most companies spend money today and place their efforts, it's on products and technology. So take a company like Ericsson, they spend a lot of money on R&D. But the technology is just a piece. And in this extreme case, if you want, the technology alone didn't have a business. There was no market. They had to come up with a business model. So what I see in strategy, innovation, and entrepreneurship is way too many people just focusing on technology and products. Yet, business models, a better business model, will always outcompete a better technology. And in many cases, there is no ready-made business model for a technology. So if you don't understand both technology products and business models, you're not competing in the 21st century. If you just understand products and you're just building products or technology, you're competing, I would say, not even the 20th century, it's 19th century competition. Today, you need to master both products, technology, and business models. Okay, that's my second big lesson. And companies have a very hard time getting beyond product. Most people I meet, senior leadership and entrepreneurs, they focus on product. That is just not enough anymore. The third thing here is business plans. Okay, so as the whole lean startup movement says, you need to, get out of the building and build, measure, learn. I would say before building, maybe you want to think as well, right? Could be helpful. But the basics here is that business plans don't work. So what I'm going to do here, and maybe the animation won't come over, I'm going to burn this business plan. So symbolically, I'm going to burn it. Maybe you can't see the animation here, but the business plan is gone. We burned it. And why? Because business plans are static documents. And as Steve Blank likes to say, no business plan survives the first contact with customers. And you might know that Steve Blank invented or launched the whole lean startup movement with his process called customer development. So what do you replace it with? You actually need to replace it with a consecutive series of failures. Now, failure in the sense of making small experiments and failing cheaply to learn and to iterate or pivot, if we use the Silicon Valley word, in order to learn and improve. Okay, and this doesn't just have to be product. That's where I think if we just focus on products, it's not enough. It's the same for business models. We need to prototype and test business models. So the point here is that you are going to try out things all the time. And I'm not just talking about trying out products, coding stuff, but actually conceptualizing, making a business model canvas, playing around with the numbers, throwing it away. Thinking of different alternatives, throwing it away, until you figured out what could really work, right? So I like this whole movement that comes from design, the design thinking movement, and Tom Wujek is one of the designers I like most. He has a saying where he says that prototyping is the conversation you have with your ideas. And this is the contrary of what I see most people doing, even with the canvas. I think people use the canvas in a very limited way. They come up with one canvas, and they refine it. They might write a business plan, but they try out things just going in one direction. So, excuse me. So what you really want to do is work like designers. So what do designers do? They make alternatives, and they try out alternatives. And what I mean with that is alternative business models, not alternative products. For the same product, you can make alternative business models, one with switching costs, one where you work with competitors, one where you try out this or that, and you will get better business models. But basically, those are the three lessons that I take away from the last couple of years. Number one, we're going to have business tools, more business tools. There's not just one tool, it's not just the canvas, it's the business model canvas, value proposition canvas, jobs to be done, processes like customer development. Okay, that's number one. Number two, it's what I call business model mechanics. Anybody who focuses on products and technology is competing with the methods of the last century. You need to understand different business models, business model alternatives, business model mechanics. We won't have enough time to go into this. This is some of the stuff that I talk through in the workshops we do. And then C, the last one is this very dynamic way of working with very rough ideas and throwing them away. And again, not just building products in a lean way and pivoting them or iterating them. No, even before that, building or designing business model canvases and value proposition canvases that you can throw away and that you can test. Okay, so that's kind of the three lessons that I want to share with you, which were very, very important for me in understanding what's going right and what's going wrong. And I would suggest now that you guys ask me a couple of questions in the next 15 minutes, and I'll take some time to answer those. Does that work?
That's great, Alex.
So do you want me to put on the video, or should we just stick with voice for bandwidth issues?
Yeah, we'll stick with what is happening, Alex. Maybe we'll try the video in the last. We want to see
okay.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Quick question on
Better you come here and then use this.
Quick question on the number 3 business plan design. Can you show with an example how for the same product will have multiple design thought process that you mentioned?
So what you can do is do a little. I would suggest that after we hang up, you do a little exercise. You put a canvas in front of you. After this call, you take a canvas and you prototype 3 different business models in 6 minutes, and each of them starting with only 2 key resources. So if you have the 9 building blocks, in the key resources you will put 2 things. You will put a bicycle and, let's say, $500. And in 6 minutes, I want you to fill out 3 different business model canvases for the same starting point. Okay? I would like you to do that, and then you'll automatically see, for exactly the same starting point, a bicycle and $500, you can come up with very many different business models with exactly the same starting point. You could imagine a career service. You could imagine a gym. You could imagine a mobile advertising platform, okay? So you can come up with very many different business model canvases for the same starting point. Now, when you start this, you won't be very sophisticated with this, but when you really learn how to do this well, what you're going to do is you might copy business models from others. So you might say, I build a platform model like Apple has done with the App Store. So I'm going to take the principles of the App Store business model of Apple and I'm going to apply it to my case. Or say, well, what is one of the strengths of Facebook's business model? Well, the biggest strength of Facebook's business model is that they have a free workforce of 1 billion people. Basically, 1 billion people provide content for their platform, which is the most valuable value proposition. The platform alone at Facebook is worth nothing. It's the content, and the content is created by others. So you might think of a business model prototype where you get others to do the work for you. Same with Red Hat Linux, right? Or, give you a third example, you might want to copy this example, the presentation you can find on YouTube, the business model of Nespresso. You might know Nespresso is the idea of a coffee machine with individual pods with coffee inside that you put in the machine, and out comes a great coffee. What Nespresso did is they transformed an entire industry from a transaction industry selling coffee through the supermarket into one with recurring revenues, which means you can only, at least until 2011, you could only put one type of coffee pods into the Nespresso machines, and that Nespresso would be earning from the pod sales over decades until the patents expired in 2011. So those are three different business model prototypes or types that you can copy into your own. But what you really want to do is figure out, okay, what could these mechanics be? The one I mentioned with Nespresso, this is called switching costs. You can only use one type of pods for this machine. If you want to use other pods, you need to buy another machine. So for the consumer, there's a switching cost. And with Facebook, the principle there is doing the work for you for free. Very powerful mechanism. The first one I mentioned, the platform model, are very powerful because it's easy to copy technology, but it's very hard to copy a platform. That's why nobody can catch up to Google with Android and to Apple with iOS, not because of the technology, because of the platform. So take those principles and ask yourself for your business model, could I apply those business model mechanics to my business? And that will go beyond thinking about products. People are today locked into thinking about products, and that's why they can't outcompete others, because that's all they know, so they will add more features. And we all know that more features is rarely, doesn't have to be, but is rarely a good thing.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Alex. Alex, I have two-part question. One is you talk about 7 business mechanics, right? Are those the only one, or do you think there are many other mechanics? And once we create a business model, what should we be doing with this mechanics? Should we see that, are we following any of these mechanics, or should we try to follow any of those mechanics? Things like that.
So, number one, we provide 7, but I'm sure there are many more. And the best way to learn about other business model mechanics is to take the great companies out there that have disrupted industries and ask yourself, what did they do differently? Was it just the product, or was it something in the business model mechanics? And you might be able to generalize and come up with new business model mechanics. And we invented 7, there might be more, okay? Now, it's not business model canvas, there's 9 blocks, and we don't think there are any more or any less. But with the business model mechanics, I do believe there could be many more. This is the first answer to the first part of the question.
Yeah.
The second part of the question, I'd say do one thing first. Look at the business model you have, and go through those 7 questions, and ask yourself how you perform on that from 0 to 10. Do you have switching costs? No? Well, you perform a 0. Are your customers locked in for 10 years? Oh, great, then you have a 10. You score a 10, right? Ask yourself that, and then as a next exercise, ask yourself, could you design some of those business model mechanics into your own? So typically, I'll give you an anecdote. I did a workshop with one of the biggest hygiene companies in the world, and among many other products, they make toilet paper, okay? So how big are the switching costs in toilet paper? There's 0. Yes. Basically, when you have 0 switching costs, people spend a lot of money on branding, okay? So if the switching costs in the customer relationship box of the business model canvas is 0, you'll see another box where it's not 0, and that's the one with key resources, where brand will be very important and people will spend a lot of money on brand. In this case, that company was so interested in switching costs after I gave them the Nespresso examples and others, that they said, hey, let's work this afternoon, the entire afternoon, on prototyping business models for toilet paper that would have switching costs designed into them. Okay, so maybe in 10 years, you won't be able to change your toilet paper anymore. You will have switching costs. You'll have to use the same brand over and over again. Not the same toilet, of course, but the same brand. Okay, so you can use the business model mechanics like that. I would suggest you use it like a library and ask yourself, what could apply, what could I do? And you take, one book after the other out of the library and ask yourself, does it apply? Maybe none of the books applies. Maybe you can't find a way to design it into your business model. But if you can be sure that it's going to be harder for your competitors to catch up on you. Which also means that it could be that you perform a 0 on all of these questions and you're still, a successful business. Well, that nobody else has thought of using any of these business model mechanics. I'll give you one case where a company has transformed an industry because they designed a business model mechanics into their business, and that's the one we use when we explain the switching costs. When Apple introduced the iPod, Steve Jobs said, this is the first time we can put 1,000 songs in a pocket. It sounds like a great product strategy, which it is. It was hard to do at the time, but it was actually a switching cost strategy. Once you have 1,000 songs on an iPod, for most people it's hard to actually switch to another brand because all their music is in one ecosystem, right? So they took that switching cost book out of the library and they designed switching costs into their business model, which still today is the foundation of their competitive advantage. So think of it that before, everybody was at 0 for switching costs, but then they came in and they designed switching costs into their business model, so they went from 0 to 10 performing on switching costs, and they outcompeted everybody else.
Great, thank you very much, Alex.
Hey Alex, I have a question. How do you brainstorm for new ideas? Suppose before you start the campus, can you tell us something about that?
So it is to come up with new ideas when you're in a particular industry, right? But what you want to do is you want to ask yourself provocative questions. I mean, it depends a bit where you start, okay? But one of the things I do in workshops when I work with large companies, I ask provocative questions like, if you had to give away your product for free, how would you generate revenues? So I remember doing this in a workshop for Fujitsu, which is a big IT infrastructure provider. Well, that's pretty provocative because for them, they were earning money just from that. Yet, based on that question, they prototype different ideas, okay? And another way to look at it is, brainstorm on how could you create different switching costs into your business model. So take some of those provocative questions that nobody has thought of and figure out how you could do it. Okay, that's one way with brainstorming. There's also a very different way, which, I don't think brainstorming is always the best way to do it. Another way is just talking to a lot of potential customers and sketching out their customer profile. So typically this is something we're doing with our Strategizer to bring the enterprise application market. We're aiming to build software that helps with the business model innovation process, okay? We don't know exactly how that software should look like. We could easily build something. We have a lot of ideas, so brainstorming is not a problem. We have the ideas. But what we don't want to do is just take one of those ideas and start building, because in software, building anything has a cost. So what we do is we talk to many people in different companies like SAP, Nestle, Procter and so on, and we try to sketch out their customer profile. So you should look up the value proposition canvas, maybe after this talk if you're not familiar with it, which is our second method, our second business tool. And within that, you have a customer profile where we say, customers, you want to basically understand three things for every customer. The jobs they're trying to get done, the negative or positive outcomes, the pains or the negative outcomes, and the gains or the positive outcomes that they expect. So talking to customers, to many different customers, you will start to see patterns that they have the same jobs to be done that nobody is helping them get done, that they have the same pains that nobody is helping them get rid of. So rather than brainstorming, a good way to start is just talking to an insane amount of people, in a similar industry, just to figure out what are their jobs, pains, and gains. And you will find a multitude of possibilities of what you could do and how you could help them. Because, when you wake up in the morning, how many problems do you encounter every day? Every problem is an opportunity, right? So you can do brainstorming, without thinking of the customer, or you could think technology and products, or you could take the other route where you start with customers. And that's what we do with the value proposition canvas, is we like starting with a good understanding of potential customers.
Alex, I have one question with respect to VP Canvas. So I was going through your blog, and what I understood that based on two segment, basically one is value proposition and customer segment, you have to come with VP Canvas. So I'm not very sure you have to first start with these two segment and then go to VP Canvas, or you start with VP Canvas and then you fill these two columns, or you have to keep both business model Canvas live and VP Canvas live.
So it does start, okay? Because at the end of the day, everything needs to work together, okay? So some people, when they use the business model canvas, they just fill out one box after the other. Yet the best business models have a very clear story where every element on the business model canvas relates to another element in the business model canvas. So typically sometimes, and I'll get to the answer of your question, if we take the business model canvas, sometimes I see people, who put a revenue stream, like advertising, into the revenue stream box. But they have no customer segment paying for that revenue stream, and they don't make it clear what the value proposition is for that revenue stream or for that customer segment, which means they don't have a story. Everything needs to be connected. You need to have a clear story, okay? It's number one. So at the end, what counts is that you have every piece in the business model canvas clear, and that you can almost prove that that's going to work. So you can start with that and then refine your value proposition and your customer segments, or you could start with the value proposition canvas, and even in the value proposition canvas, you could start with a hypothetical, something you want to build, you want to design with a value proposition, then do the customer profile, and then go out and start testing it. Or you could do it the other way around. You talk to people, you sketch out the customer profile, and then design the value proposition. It doesn't matter where you start. It's a very messy and non-linear process. At the end, all that matters is that you have filled out the entire business model canvas, you have a great story, and you have validated these things. And then if you need more refinement in the value proposition canvas, which I do think makes a lot of sense, that you have that filled out as well. Where you start doesn't matter. At the end, everything counts, and you need to have everything. So you could start with the value proposition canvas, but as I said with the Xerox example, you need a business model to make it work. Or you can start with the business model canvas and say, hey, how could I build switching costs in here? Then you refine the value proposition, then you go test it. It doesn't matter. It's a very messy and iterative process. It's a back and forth and back and forth and back and forth all the time. And this is actually the reason why large companies have a hard time doing this, because they like linear processes. This is is much easier for entrepreneurs to do because they usually realize that it's a messy process and that they have to throw away things and start over. So you might do a value proposition canvas and then a business model canvas, and then you realize you got to throw everything away, or you need to throw one or the other away. It's not a linear process. So where you start, in which box, with which tool, doesn't matter. And at the end, you need it all.
Yeah, thanks.
Alex, for example, we have multiple business models, like you said, with the design thinking. Let's say that we prototyped, we tested them. How do we prioritize which of them we do first, or we will superimpose one on top of the other, or how do we start there?
So basically, you need to start. So you have a business model canvas sketched out. You need to ask yourself which one is the most important assumption that could destroy everything else. So in some cases, it might be that your business model is not going to work if you can't produce, a product at a specific price. So you first want to test if you could even make that product at that price. Okay? So just figure out what's the most important and start with there. Because if you start with less important things, you're probably wasting your time. If you start with the most important thing, then you already got the base assumption right, and then you can go to the next one. It's a challenge, obviously, to figure out what is the important assumption. It could be something in terms of costs, because you need to produce something at a specific price. It could be revenues. Okay, you need to sell something at a specific price. It could be the size of the market. If the market is not big enough, that it's not even worth pursuing. It could be that if you're in a large company, one of the most important assumptions that you need to fight with, if you are at a company like Nestle, building a $50 million business is a failure. People build a $500 million or $1 billion business. Otherwise, they fail. So their base assumption is often, can I actually, is this opportunity big enough? So just want to start with figuring out what's the most important guess that could kill everything else. And that's number one. Then when you decide deciding between different opportunities, you want to ask yourself, what are your decision criteria? And that is unique to every individual entrepreneur in every company. You might choose between different business model alternatives depending on their growth potential. So at Nestle, for example, if your business can't be big enough, you got to eliminate it, right? An entrepreneur might have a different assessment. The most important criteria might be, the capital that is required to launch this idea, because some people have access to capital, some people don't. For another entrepreneur or for another company, the main criteria might be risk. Which business models are riskier than others? So you need to distinguish between two things when you start making decisions if you want to go or don't go. One is, what are the most important assumptions? Start testing those, because they could kill the entire idea. It's number one. Number two is, if you look at the business models that you have, the business model alternatives, the opportunities, ask yourself, what are your criteria to select between the different potential business models or ideas? Is it growth? Revenue potential? Is it risk? Is it capital required, or whatsoever? Okay?
Thanks, Alex. We can still see your desktop.
Oh, you can see the tweet deck. That's fine.
Any other question? Hey, Alex, nobody has any other questions, so if you can, if you want to add some more things, it would be great. If you have time.
I always have time, but I guess, it's a bit hard without visuals and without interaction. What I would suggest you try doing as an exercise now in the remaining time, when we hang up, is try this exercise. Put a big timer on the screen in the front. And then get everybody to sketch up a small canvas on a piece of paper, if you have one printed out, even better. And then, in 6 minutes, sketch out 3 different business models for the same starting point, a bicycle and $500. And here's the best thing to do. After 2 minutes, when you finished your first example, throw it away. Make a second one, throw it away, make a third one. Because 2 things will happen you'll feel uncomfortable with. People feel uncomfortable with throwing away ideas quickly. This is number 1. And number 2, people feel uncomfortable with going very fast in prototyping ideas. We feel more secure if we refine ideas, yet more refinement doesn't mean that an idea is going to work. So if you think, about a business for ages, and you may even make a very long 100-page business plan, it doesn't mean it's going to work more. What you want to do is play around with these ideas, and then once you've figured out what could really work, you go testing. Once you made the numbers work, you go testing, but you always need to be able to let go, okay? That's very important. And to finish, so I would suggest you make that example. And to finish, I'll give you, a small case, which is more powerful if I sketch it out for you with the strategizer and the numbers, but I'll just tell you about the example. So there's a startup team in the US that was looking at, building a medical device. And that would do genetic testing for doctors so they could use that in their practices. So they sketched out a business model with the assumed price, which they actually tested, and they figured out that with that particular business model of producing and selling that testing device to doctors, to the 110,000 doctors you have in the US, they could only make maybe $1 million in profit, okay? They said, that's not very good. So what they did is, they looked at Nespresso and they said, hey, Nespresso did something very interesting, the example that we talked about before. They had pods, and they had the coffee machine, and they earned money, recurring revenues from the pods. So now for a medical device, well, what could you do? You can say, and this is exactly what they did, and they sketched out the second model. They said, what if we modified this medical device, this testing device, a little bit, so that you can only make tests if you buy every time a cartridge with testing strips, okay? And you would have to buy those over the internet. So that means, in addition to the base product, they modified it to add a consumable, even if the solution could have been done without the consumable. So here's what happened. They sketched it out, and they would come up with the business model that would earn over $20 million in revenues. So the simple design change to the business model, and ultimately also to the product, allowed them to come up with a business model that was financially much more interesting. That's exactly why I get people to do this silly little exercise with the bicycle. Because if you understand how to design better business models, and this you can only do this when you prototype them quickly, you might come up with an opportunity that is 20 times more interesting financially, right? So is that we hang up the call now, and you actually do this exercise. Put on a timer, 6 minutes, get everybody in groups of 2, to work in groups of 2, and sketch out 3 different business models for 1 bicycle and $500. How does that sound?
How is it sounding? How does it sounding, he's asking.
Yeah, hello.
Disconnected.
Yes? How does that sound as an example? You go ahead and sketch out.
Sounds very great.
Perfect.
Alex, I have one last question. When are you coming to India?
I come to India when I get invited to India.
Okay, then we will invite you.
Alex, if we want to do a workshop with you, what can we do? How can we approach? Because they have come as close as to Singapore, right?
you can write to Elizabeth,
Okay.
who you are in contact with, and she will tell you what are the requirements.
Sure, great.
Get me to India.
Yeah, I'll definitely write to her.
Excellent. So I wish all of you guys good luck with the ventures, startups or things you're building inside companies, and I hope you succeed with all your ideas.
Thank you,
Yes,
Alex.
Thank you very much.
Bye everybody.
Bye. Thank you.